I'm supposed to tell you about the history of the War Crimes Tribunal on Vietnam, which was constituted on November the 13th at a meeting in London, in which Russell was joined by Jean-Paul Sartre and a score of other distinguished personalities. At this meeting, Russell dealt with one of the main problems which has concerned all other tribunals since. He said, this tribunal has no clear historical precedent. The Nuremberg Tribunal, although it was concerned with designated war crimes, was possible because the victorious Allied powers compelled the vanquished to present their leaders for trial. Inevitably, the Nuremberg trials, supported as they were by state power, contained a strong element of realpolitik. Our own task is more difficult. We do not represent any state power, nor can we compel the policymakers responsible for crimes against the people of Vietnam to stand accused before us. We lack force majeure. The procedures of a trial are impossible to implement. I believe that these apparent limitations are in fact virtues. We are free to conduct a solemn and historic investigation, uncompelled by reasons of state or other such obligations. It was difficult for that tribunal to commence its work. Jean-Paul Sartre had wanted it to sit in Paris, and he had asked President de Gaulle to agree to such a meeting. The request was denied. At first it seemed that the tribunal would have nowhere to convene, but then the Swedish authorities agreed to allow it to meet in Stockholm. The first meeting there was followed by a second in Copenhagen. The findings of the tribunal were published right across the world, and they made a notable contribution to the development of public opposition to the war. It became impossible to ignore the atrocities which marked that conflict, and it can be said that the tribunal made an important contribution to allowing the plight of the Vietnamese people, in Russell's words, to be presented to the conscience of mankind. Subsequently, a second tribunal was constituted to examine repressions in Latin America. This was initiated by Lelio Basso and Russell's widow, Edith. Edith extended the initial invitations to those who agreed to serve in the investigations. After 3 sessions, a permanent People's Tribunal was established. And this continued its work in response to popular requests from many countries. Russell had died in 1970, so that all this work had to be carried through without him. But now there are many others who have sought to emulate the Vietnam inquiries, some of them in concert with participants in the original tribunals, and some of them spontaneously. Those of us who had been involved in the first phases of the Russell Tribunal could not, of course, direct the spontaneous initiatives which grew up in different countries of the world. Some of them concerned matters with which we were strongly in approval, and some of them we found rather strange, such as the inquiry announced in Yugoslavia into the regulation of international football tournaments. But the intensification of conflict around the world, and particularly in the Middle East, gave rise to acute international disquiet. In February 2003, all this culminated in demonstrations in which millions of people opposed to the planned invasion of Iraq protested. The shock and awe assault on Iraqi cities, which killed an estimated 1 million people, gave rise to a new initiative to make a tribunal on the conflict in Iraq. The World Tribunal on Iraq had our explicit blessing and a truly global range of participants. The final session of this tribunal met in Istanbul at the end of June 2005. It faced the same problems we had faced in the beginning, and these were summed up in the words of Arundhati Roy, that it could not reach judgments that were binding in international law. She said, "Our ambitions far surpass that. The World Tribunal on Iraq places its faith in the consciences of millions of people across the world who do not wish to stand by while the people of Iraq are being slaughtered, subjugated and humiliated." A key participant in this inquiry was Professor Richard Falk, who has subsequently been appointed as the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestine territories occupied since 1967. Professor Falk set out to visit Gaza and the West Bank in connection with his duties when, last December the 14th, he was arrested and detained at Ben Gurion Airport by the Israeli authorities, following which he was summarily deported. At that time, we were actively involved in the preparation of a new tribunal on Palestine, being convened on the initiative of Pierre Galland and his colleagues. I wrote to Professor Falk about this, seeking his advice. Of course, he could not commit the United Nations to our support, but he did say, "Given the manner in which the UN operates, I will have to keep my special rapporteur role separate from the great work you have presided over for so long at the Russell Peace Foundation. The whole direction of civil society vigilance with respect to state crimes that are exempted from accountability due to power politics has had a great influence on my work for many years." He went on to say, "In the present situation, there is unprecedented willingness of the UN system to acknowledge the importance of investigating whether war crimes have been committed in Gaza. And even the Secretary General has indicated that if the evidence supports the allegations, as it surely does, then accountability should follow. At the same time, I anticipate that political forces will sustain the impunity of Israeli leaders and that no mechanism of accountability will be established. In the light of this institutional vacuum, the role of civil society is crucial in establishing the grounds for the imposition of accountability in symbolic form. Such a proceeding, if well arranged, will also give additional support to the many initiatives now underway around the world involving boycotts, divestment and the like. I would encourage you to move ahead with your plans, perhaps placing emphasis on the plight of Gaza. Certainly, any documentary record that emerges will be useful to me in preparing reports for the United Nations. This is rather a large task, but I think that there is assembling, under the leadership of Pierre Galland, a team of people who are capable of rising to meet the challenge. And I do hope very much that the press will pay due attention to this process. Thank you very much.